This is a massive show of force now. You've just been hearing about it as well in the bulletins. I'm talking, of course, about the NATO exercise now. There's going to be military drills. It's going to have about 90,000 troops. And it's got me wondering tonight, do you think that NATO is now more valuable and needed than ever before or not? Mathew Laza, where are you on it?
Absolutely. I think NATO is needed more than ever before, which is why Trump's comments at the weekend were disgraceful. It's been absolutely integral to our security and the security of America, as well as the other alliance members across Western Europe, and now expanding into Eastern Europe. And so, therefore, it's important that we support NATO wholeheartedly. They're right. The Americans are right. The European countries, including ourselves, need to step up and spend more, with the honourable exceptions of countries like Poland, which do already spend more as a percentage of their income than the States. But they're wrong to start saying...
And in a second, by the way, I'm going to play you what Donald Trump actually said, in case anyone is not familiar with that.
Absolutely. So, I mean, he's you know, it's right that, I mean, Joe Biden as well has done the calls. And what's particularly depressing about it is now is the moment where spending is starting to go up, where people are beginning to take responsibility. Germany, largest economy in Europe, hasn't spent enough on defence for decades. Mixture of, you know, wanting to spend it on other things that win more votes more easily. And it's, you know, sort of historic debate in Germany about defence spending. Now is actually it's spending it up. You saw the Chancellor of Germany. It's digging the first foundation of a new arms factory this week, which I didn't think I would see with Social Democrat, Labour Chancellor doing that. So, yeah, we need NATO and we need to support it, and Trump endangers it.
Peter Hitchens, do you agree with Matt?
No. I was a tremendous supporter of NATO when we needed it, when there was a country called the Soviet Union, which had gigantic tank armies stationed in the centre of Europe pointing westwards and menacing us, and which also began in the 1980s to install medium-range nuclear missiles, also some menaces. And at that time, I used to annoy all my liberal neighbours in Oxford by having a NATO sticker on my car. But when the Soviet Union collapsed in 1991, an event which I saw in Moscow, I thought, well, the facts have changed. I've changed my mind. And I thought that NATO should have been wound up then. What NATO is supposed to do now, I'm not absolutely sure. It's been rightly said that its expansion eastwards has created the very problem which it claimed to be defending us against. Tension in Central Europe has grown enormously thanks to this expansion and to other things which the United States has done. And I believe that the policy of eastward NATO expansion has led ultimately to the war which we now have in Ukraine. So, no, I'm not enthusiastic about these exercises, nor do I think people should overrate NATO. One of the reasons why it was successful was because its original aims were so limited. It settled on the territories which the Soviet Union had not taken over at Yalta in 1945, and it said, we will defend them. It basically said not one step further. But it acknowledged that there was a rival power in Europe, and it didn't go anywhere near that. The Soviet Union invaded Hungary, and it invaded Czechoslovakia, and it sent its tanks into Berlin in 1953, and NATO did absolutely nothing, because NATO had agreed that beyond a certain line it had no interest. The other thing that people must realise is that the fabled Article 4 of NATO, which promises a response by all in the event of one member being attacked, is nothing like as strong as people think it is. It doesn't commit the United States to military action if another NATO member is attacked.
Well, there's a couple of things.
The United States would never have signed it if it did. And there is a grave danger, and the history of Europe shows this, in making guarantees which you're not actually in a position to keep. So I don't think the expansion of NATO or its current state are doing anything much for us at all. That doesn't mean, by the way, that I endorse Donald Trump's oafish, moronic statements, because I don't.
We can agree.
Well, let's play these remarks that both my panel have dismissed already. So let's start with what Donald Trump had to say, which these guys are referring to.
Well, sir, if we don't pay and we're attacked by Russia, will you protect us? I said, you didn't pay? You're delinquent? He said, yes, let's say that happened. No, I would not protect you. In fact, I would encourage them to do whatever the hell they want. You got to pay. You got to pay your bills.
Well, you two think that's nonsense. That sounds like common sense to me. Of course you've got to pay your bills. It's not a country club.
He thinks it's like Mar-a-Lago. You don't pay the fee to get in. You know, there is an aim that everybody spends 2%, and it's right that countries step up. Frankly, most of the Northern European countries, and including Germany, will meet that over the next couple of years. The people who are kind of right down at the bottom are Spain and Portugal.
Yeah, but hold on. It was something like about 7 countries out of the 30
at the moment,
that paid. So if those countries don't value prioritising their funds into protecting their citizens, why should people like the US prioritise their fund in protecting those citizens.
Well, I think the European countries should spend more. In fact,
but they're not, and that's his point.
Well, they are. They're moving. All the graph shows that every country is increasing defence spending.
But his point is, in the here and now,
Germany.
they are not.
You can't invite your enemies to come and bomb.
NATO's not a protection racket.
Exactly.
It's an alliance.
Yes.
And though, after all the things I've said about it and how its expansion has been a mistake, it's absurd to say that weak countries, which can't afford huge military expenditure, should be deprived of protection because they're weak and poor. The whole point
of
if the issue of NATO, which I would to some extent dispute this, if the issue of NATO is freedom versus tyranny, then it doesn't matter if the free country which you're defending is poor and can't afford to spend a large part of its GDP on defence. You still defend.
But am I wrong? Because I thought it was about 2%.
The Trump statement is
but what is the percentage?
Is moronic.
But you're calling it a really large
percent of their GDP. It's an enormous sum of money for these.
But it's 2% of their GDP.
We live in a comparatively rich country. But to start increasing our defence...
But it's 2% of their GDP, so it's relative.
Point, Michelle.
I know, but it's relative.
To start increasing our defence expenditure would mean either increasing taxes. I'm sure you enjoy paying taxes a lot, and everybody does, and people will flock out to vote for a government which increases their taxes, or it means taking money from something else. What do you want to take it from? Education?
Well, we pay our bills here.
We just about make 2% now. And
with that, what do? Half our armed forces are conked out most of the time, and they're much too small. So it really isn't. If we're relying on our ability to spend our way into the good books of Donald Trump to keep ourselves safe, we're in big trouble.
I'm in an island of one. Happens very often on this. But I like the island of one. It's quite a common sense island. I agree actually with Donald Trump that if you don't, or you weren't, or you're not willing to pay your way, why should everyone else step in anyway? There's another clip I want to play.
Out of a moral principle that you defend the weak against the strong.
Yeah, but you don't pay bills with principle, do you? You don't go into your mortgage at a place and say, I ain't got no money, but I've got principle.
That's the whole point of principle, isn't it? But then again, you don't give out of charity on the expectation, you don't give to charity on the expectation of getting something back from it, do you?
Look, there's another clip I want to bring in. You guys can have the final say and thought on the NATO Donald Trump thing. But a man you probably saw interviewed, Vladimir Putin, was interviewed by Tucker Carlson. One of the things I want to explore here, we're talking about is NATO needed more now than ever. It's about how prominent that actual threat is from Russia. Let's listen to what Putin had to say.
They're trying to fuel the Russian threat.
The threat I think you're referring to is a Russian invasion of Poland, Latvia, expansionist behavior. Can you imagine a scenario where you sent Russian troops to Poland?
Only in one case, if Poland attacks Russia. Why? Because we have no interest in Poland, Latvia, or anywhere else. Why would we do that? We simply don't have any interest.
So, I mean, Putin there, Peter, he's basically saying that all of these countries are running around whipping up this kind of what he was calling an imaginary threat from Russia for their own ends, really. Do you think he's got any interest, basically, in expanding his tentacles out?
Well, a lot of things have changed since the Ukraine war broke out. But you have to remember that I think there were 13 years after the Baltic states got their independence from the Soviet Union when they were not members of NATO. And I don't recall Boris Yeltsin threatening to invade them or invading them during that period. The same goes for the Eastern European countries, which joined NATO quite long after they'd been released from the Soviet prison. Russia is not the Soviet Union. And amongst other things, there were two crucial differences. One, it's not an ideological state. It doesn't want to impose a political philosophy on its neighbours. The other is it doesn't have global ambitions. And the third one, which is equally important, is it is broke. And it doesn't really have very much money, and its population is in decline. So it has limited abilities as a military power. And being, as it is, a very inefficient and corrupt country, it's not very good at fielding military forces.
But the original aim was
very nearly failed in Ukraine.
Russia into NATO.
Sorry?
There was the Partnership for Peace agreement. There was an original idea that you would bring a democratic Russia in, and let's hope that there is a democratic Russia that we can join NATO.
It was made clear, actually, in the Putin interview that Clinton had been sympathetic to the idea when Putin had first put it to them, and then backed off.
And then his advisors apparently intervened and changed Clinton's mind.
It's not. The truth is that NATO with Russia in it would be a wholly different organisation. from NATO without Russia. And the same with the European Union. The reason why there's never been any consideration of Russia joining the European Union is it would completely unbalance it. At the moment, Germany is the largest and most dominant country in the European Union. If Russia came in, that would change, and you can't see the Germans or anyone else much being particularly pleased by it. It won't happen. But the difficulty then was how do you integrate Russia into a European space of peace and prosperity without it being in either of these organizations? One of the things you don't do, almost certainly, in my view, is say you're going to expand NATO into Ukraine, which pretty much everybody understood was a neutral space until about, 2000...
Until he invaded?
No, until about 2008, when George W. Bush suddenly announced that in Bucharest that he was going to encourage Ukraine and Georgia to join NATO, at which point we began...
But there would be no progress.
After that, we were on the conveyor belts of this conflict.
Well, there you go. Clive says, please can you tell your panel, Clive says, basically, you're talking tosh, you're referencing Article 4 of NATO and it's Article 5, but it's not actually, and I'm sure Peter will correct me if I'm wrong, it's basically a combination of the two. Article 4 is when members get together and discuss potential threats and territorial compromise, and Article 5,
he's quite right.
off the back of Article 4, once you've consulted and all the rest of it, Article 5 is basically the attack one, attack all principle.
He's quite right. It was my mistake. But no, we all make them. I had actually been looking at another treaty this afternoon in which Article 4 is rather important, but that's my only excuse.
There you go. There's no flies on our Clive. He's paying attention. That's what we like. We like that, Clive.